Well, hello, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Coffee with Steven. And we begin No Shave November, so you should hopefully see me over the next few blogs go completely full rabbi on you. In any event, I want to talk a little bit about today's blog called Rights and Responsibilities. And this is something that you've heard me talk about several times before in the past. And if, like everything else, it initiated from a phone call. So I got a client that had contacted me, not someone who was ever trained here at Artemis. It was actually someone who had seen some of my USCCA videos. He called me up and he effectively wanted to bring a lawsuit against either the Sheriff's Department or the Department of Justice or someone as it relates to fees as well as training requirements to get a CCW. He feels that this is an infringement on his constitutional rights. After all, to vote, you cannot be subject to a poll tax and a requirement that you go through some sort of training protocols or that you go through some sort of fee agreement with the law enforcement agency that issues a CCW would be the functional equivalent to a poll tax. And I'll be honest with you, he may have some valid arguments as it relates to that. But in having my discussions, he was very, very antagonistic towards the idea of training. Specifically, he was challenging the requirement that you go through a training program prior to getting a CCW. He thought that if there was going to be a requirement for a training program, the state should pay for that, which, again, maybe that's a valid argument. But as we started getting more and more into it, it became very, very apparent that his angst was about training to begin with. Essentially, he was saying, look, I know better than anyone around me on how to operate a firearm. I know better on how to protect myself. I have owned guns for the majority of my life. Now, I sidebar for a second. This individual is an older individual. He's not a young'un by any stretch of the imagination, but he was taking this position that by simply owning his firearms for several decades and going to the range on a regular basis and punching holes in paper, he had elevated himself to becoming a master at skill at arms. And it was wholly inappropriate for the state to mandate that he receive some level of education outside the scope of what he had developed for himself. So it really did kind of represent a fundamental challenge to me. As a classical liberal, I'm always terrified of the idea of the state coming in and regulating behavior, all right? And clearly mandating that somebody go through a training program is a state mandating certain behavioral requirements, right? But on the flip side to that, there's the statement that I make on a regular basis. You have a right to keep and bear arms, but with all rights come responsibilities. And with this particular right, there's more than a simple responsibility. There's a moral mandate. You need to be training constantly, consistently, repetitively, and with purpose. And training and simply going to the range and doing target practice are two entirely different things. To kind of give an analogy, this would be the functional equivalent of saying, well, I drive my vehicle every single day. I back up out of my garage, I get onto the driveway, and then I put it into drive and I drive it back into my garage. I constantly train in my vehicle, therefore I am an expert driver. Oh, so do you ever drive around in the neighborhood, go on the freeways, drive in inclement weather? No, absolutely not. All I do is go back and forth between my driveway and my garage. Well, we would all look at that and say that does not elevate you to being the functional equivalent of a Formula One race car driver. It's the same thing with firearms. In any event, I do hope you read the blog. As always, if you want to contact me, you certainly can do so via the blog or by emailing me directly at stephen@artemishq.com. And as always, train constantly, train consistently, train repetitively, and train with purpose. Above all else, stay safe.